G'day and welcome to another edition of the Aussie Ideas Man. This one's a bit daunting for me because I've decided to just talk on this one and do very little by way of text boxes. This means I'll probably be taking out a few pregnant pauses, but being lazy, I'll try to just leave a lot of them in. Well, this is all, as you can see, thanks to part one of the Aptera Owners Club interview with Chris Anthony, May 2024. I'm going to just make comments right off the cuff. They won't be very comprehensive because at 70 years old I've started to slow down in my thinking, and I don't think I need to say too much when nothing has really been said by Chris Anthony. It wasn't long ago I made a video where I said Chris Anthony talks and says nothing, and this is another occasion. In fact, what I might do is rerun the video with a timer on the answers to each question the cretin asks, because he waffles that much. A normal person would be able to answer in about a quarter of the time that he does, but he just goes off at the mouth and tries to baffle you with science. He just talks for the sake of talking, and any half-intelligent person would see through him. Well, let's just have a listen and see what I can do.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Chris. I know that you have a busy schedule, and we appreciate your time.
Of course.
Okay. Well, we've all seen the latest kind of monthly-ish update. It's been about 2 months since the previous update, and I know that's a very curated video, and you just hit the highlights. Can you kind of tell us what's been going on? Is there anything details you can flesh out for us about what's been going on in the past 2 months?
Oh gosh, we film those updates and then we kind of hold onto them to release. So it's been so busy around here. I don't even know that I've really reflected on that update. But it's really just being busy with getting the first production intent parts in, building up these first vehicles, finishing up a lot of the electrical engineering, firmware, software, app, UI, that sort of stuff. A lot of the mechanical stuff has been done for a very long time. We had this suspension development stuff, which kind of lingered because we had two different software models between what they had in Italy and what we had here. So they wanted to correlate the data that they had and the way that they were finishing up the suspension, because they were the ones responsible for releasing the frame design. So torsional rigidity and how the suspension acted overall was something that we definitely wanted to have good data on. And the real world testing that we did in Italy, I think, let them finally put a pin in that. But to be honest, it didn't change hardly anything. A couple hairs worth of degree changes here and there was all that they suggested, and we did take their suggestions because they're very good at what they do.
Okay.
So it's really been just how do we prepare for the first real testing and validation phases now that we put a pin in all the mechanical design. The electrical design and firmware and software can kind of be a little slower.
Sure.
But a lot of the big parts, especially like the body and chassis tooling, they just take so long to build those big ass parts.
I think I'll stop here. It's hard to interrupt him. He goes so hard. But anyway, what he said about the suspension is still leaving people asking questions as to what on earth is going on. He's saying that CPC, or maybe Danese, we don't know, but somebody over in Italy is responsible for the frame design. And because they're responsible for the frame design, they want to test the suspension themselves on a beta. This is bizarre, but this is what he's saying. And then after testing, there's almost nothing to change. So what a waste of money that was. But in either case, what's CPC or Danese doing being responsible for the frame design? I don't know at all. It doesn't make sense to me. And then on the electrical side, they got the P1 or PI1, I should say, body parts shipped over on April Fool's Day just so that they could do the electrical wiring and make sure that it all fit. and it's 2 months later, and we have not seen any electrical wiring done. Why was that sent over on April Fool's Day and nothing being done yet? He's talking, but he's not explaining what's going on at all. They should have had the wiring harnesses all ready to go in before the body parts came over. Yazaki has had months and months and months to provide at least 16 sets of wiring harnesses, but if not, just one first for this PI1 installation.
Get those done first, get the vehicles here, and then we can refine and tune and do software and firmware and all that stuff, basically along the way. So that's what's been keeping us busy, is just vendor agreements and contracts to get these first parts here and receiving these parts, and seeing what really works for production. Some things may only exist with the PI vehicles, and then we'll have to switch to another vendor for volume production. So that's also an interesting balancing act, is some of the volume suppliers are like, no, we can't just build you 20 of these parts. Like either we build you 1,000 or we build you nothing.
Now, he's done this time and time again in the past. He's come up with this excuse that people will only do bulk orders and not smaller orders. But in any case, from memory, way back in the past, and I've had a look for these things, and I think I will make videos that will refer to the past a bit more, because things are starting to be revealed. They're starting to show that they're not sticking to any plans in the first place. They made plans, they made definite plans, but they're not sticking to them. Even the change to CPC was a massive redirection away from plans. But in any case, early on, I recall hearing them saying about there were 4 phases. First, the alpha phase, which they made 3 of. Then the beta phase, which would be for all the testing and validating so that they would be ready for production parts. Then the gamma phase, and they made 1 gamma. I'll revert back to the beta and say that they promised between 6 and 12, and there was only 1 mobile beta that we ever saw. It was meant to be only for test and validation, yet they registered it and made it the #1 joyriding vehicle because alphas couldn't go pretty much out of the car park without overheating, and they just didn't have the battery to make them go any reasonable distance anyway. They were fakes. Well, anyway, Beta took over as the joyriding mule, and very little testing was done. Extremely little testing was done on the mobile Beta. But next was supposed to be the gamma phase, and the gamma phase, from memory, was supposed to be the hand-built representation of deltas, which would all be then production line built. That was the difference between gamma and delta. Gamma was what you would get, but it was hand-built. Deltas would be what you get off a production line. Now, these PIs are a change to the plans. PI 1 to 16, if they ever get anywhere near 16, are hand-built. And it's because of this excuse they aren't willing to get a few thousand of each item for production. They just want to stick to the 16, and so they will revert to hand building them. This is all straying from the plan.
There are some situations like that we've been having to sort through, but Jordan on the supply chain side has been doing an amazing job, and our help in Italy and Europe has been great, and even our partners in Asia have been doing some awesome things over the last couple months.
Okay. So going back to that suspension design, I noticed in the update that the suspension, that you guys were using the beta for the suspension, but the betas, like swing arms and all that stuff, are different than the CAD drawings of the PI vehicle. So
it's really all about the pivot points on where the suspension moves about. So the production arms and stuff, they do look a bit different, but they're not really different in how they function.
Okay.
And so we went through some efforts on manufacturability and weight savings and stuff like that, and that changed the way some of the arms looked. But from a kinematics perspective, they all still function the same. And the difference between the beta suspension and what became the gamma suspension, we had a beta suspension, we went out, we did our testing, we refined that a good bit, and then went back and built basically a gamma suspension that we're testing. And that's really what we sent over to Europe, was this kind of gamma-ish suspension. And they basically said, it's very close, but we suggest, these changes and these changes, some of which got us a little better turning radius, some of which got us a little better low speed predictability.
I'll stop it here because he throws in, while he's saying virtually nothing, because this is just going off at the mouth as usual, you don't get any real information. But while he's giving you nothing, he decides to throw in things like, we've got an improved turning radius. And that's because the turning radius has been a sore point. And he likes to just smooth over any small point, just with talk, but no proof, as usual, never proof. So yes, better turning radius, better low-speed drivability, I think he's saying something like that now. And this is because test drivers and test riders have said it's still rough as guts. And so, and so he just throws that in there to smooth over that. And so with almost no suspension differences, okay, he just said there were almost nothing in suspension differences. Now you're getting all of these big benefits. And they're benefits that need to be said because people have identified their problems in the past. So he's just using questions to smooth over past problems that he has. And none of it is true.
Driving. So kind of some of the nuances of daily driving that some of these guys that have built, cars and vehicle programs for the last 30 years know that, our young team here hasn't had as much experience with. But, we've had some amazing contributors to the suspension. We worked with Roush Engineering to start to get the basics of the suspension, and basically had our own team work on it for, 6 months-ish. And then that got us to the gamma suspension, and then had Denise Engineering basically design it for manufacturability and, how we actually produce 50 to 100,000 of these things a year. So from the bushings to the materials, to the draft angles, to how we actually connect other stuff like the brake hoses and things like that to it, that was really what Denise kind of took across the finish line.
Okay. And then
along the way, they had some suggestions, because you get new engineers involved and they look at it and they're like, if you do this, could be a little, if you do this, you could be a little better. So
what the beta going over to Italy was all about was that they needed this suspension as a diversion from the fact that everything else is not going well. The skin cooling has been abandoned. The solar, since they were delaminating, they said, we've got better ones now, but they haven't made any better ones or shown us any better ones. And so all of these things are issues that they don't want at the forefront of people's minds. So suspension, even though it was supposed to have been a done and dusted part of the progress, it has to just come back to be a diversion. That's what's really happening. And the gullible fools are sucking it up as usual.
Okay, got it. And so now, as of I guess a few weeks ago, that the suspension design is finalized, and you can send it to the supplier to make, right?
yes, yeah.
And so is that what's happening now? Is it being made?
Yeah, we haven't chosen all the suppliers for all the metal parts, so we're still considering some different quotes on who we want to make what parts. And some of it's a timing consideration, some of it's a money consideration. But obviously we want parts as quickly as possible so we can test. I know our last interview, we thought that we'd probably have prototypes in July, August, and here we are in May. So
I'm going to have to interrupt him. He just talks too hard, too fast, too much. But here he is saying, yes, and then he goes, but we don't have supplies for the metal parts. If you look at the suspension, it's nearly all metal. It is so much metal that it's unbelievable. There is very little. There are parts that run through the suspension that aren't metal, but they're not the suspension. The suspension is probably 90% metal. And so there's not really a yes there, is there? He should have said no. The suspension is 90% metal and we don't have metal parts even contracted for.
Time is creeping by for sure.
Yeah.
And I think we could still probably have, some vehicles rolling around in August. Our target is still July. Releasing these big.
Let's wait until the end of August and discover that they're not even close. He just knows that he can throw out dates and the fanboys will suck them up.
Metal parts for the chassis and suspension. So late, we're really going to be waiting on those things, especially like the big. It'll be a die casting at the end of the day for the rear of the suspension and the front clip that holds the front suspension. Those are big, complex parts, and to get them sand cast and then post milled, just takes longer than if you were able to smash them out of a die, like the GigaPress does for Tesla parts and other stuff.
How about the big frame that goes around the battery? Is that one large piece or is that multiple pieces?
Well, there's a battery frame and then there's a frame that goes up to the body structure. They're both separate and distinct. The battery frame is really just extruded aluminum that has these corner die cast nodes that get welded together, and then there's kind of center supports that support the vehicle longitudinally and laterally.
Maybe I'm calling it the wrong thing. I'm talking about like that, I guess the chassis then. The thing that the battery like drops into, that it looks like a big oval ring and like the front wheels and the back wheels attached to that.
Yeah, we've been calling it the frame or the chassis. If it's got suspension on it, then you'd call it a chassis. If it's just the frame without the suspension on it, then you'd probably just call it a frame.
Yeah, so is that frame one piece? And
the frame is 6 pieces right now.
Okay.
And we think that we could combine a couple of those pieces and bring it down to 4 pieces.
I'll just do a bit of simple maths. If you've got 6 pieces and you combine a couple of them, you bring that down to 5. Think about it. Get the couple, you've got 4. And now combine that couple and goes back into the 4, there's 5. They would have to do it twice. They would have to get another couple from the 4 and combine them as well. Then they would be down to 4. This guy can't even do simple maths in his head.
Future, it would just cost more tooling cost in the future.
So, is that thing made or is that being made?
It's being made right now. So the last changes that Denise made was to the front suspension. So where those pickup points are for the front suspension. And now that that's done, we've released and it's been a couple weeks since we released that, but it's been off with the suppliers, and some suppliers are a few weeks and some suppliers are a few months. So we're really evaluating those. I think we had a meeting on it yesterday, but I don't put a pin on exactly who.
So Denise did make changes to the frame, and it's the frame that's in beta. And this is interesting. It just sounds like he's just waffling on. I don't know that Denise has made changes to the beta frame. And why would he, when beta is not anything related to the PIs at all? If they make changes, they would make changes to the design of the frame for the PIs and not change beta. Beta's not going anywhere. Beta's been retired.
We're going to make those parts, but that the rails and then basically the 2 end caps that hold the front and rear suspension, those will be made separately, and then we'll probably bring them back here to be welded up, or we'll have one of the shops that we know put it on a jig table and weld it up. But obviously it has to be very dimensionally tolerant, because the rear suspension has to be aligned with the front suspension, or weird things happen.
Right. Okay, so we don't know. So if they're being made, and you haven't even picked the supplier for the suspension parts yet.
Well, we have the suppliers for the production parts. The problem is getting these 16 development vehicles done. So
okay,
We're starting with 3 and then we'll build the rest after the first 3 because we'll probably learn some from putting together the first 3. That's where we're at now.
But the production guys are like, we can't make you 20 of them.
They don't.
Okay.
But some of them do, but it's very expensive and they take a long time. So, shops that specialize in just quick turning milled aluminum stuff, and they're all over the world.
I see.
A lot of great shops in LA, a lot of great shops in Detroit, a lot of great shops in Asia. There are some great shops in Italy, in Europe. We've got quotes out to all those places.
I see. So it's kind of like backwards from the way that I imagined it. I imagined that you guys would do the PI vehicles and find those suppliers, but actually you guys have already found the production suppliers. Like that's been nailed down, and it's like prototype suppliers that you guys are trying to figure out now.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about the CPC relationship was they also brought, a whole world of supply chain stuff that is used to doing vehicles in our volumes, supercar world and, low volume production European vehicles. It's not something that really exists in the US. So you go to Detroit and you ask somebody, hey, do you build 20,000, 50,000 vehicles a year? And they're like, no, we don't want your build. We want the 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 vehicle programs or we're not interested. So yeah, over a year ago, when we started to finalize our designs for the main bink structure and body structure, then we got introduced to a lot of great connections in Europe that CPC has worked with, great working relationships with over the years, and they build volume parts for Fiat and Maserati and VW and a lot of European brands like that. So they're well capable, but they're also used to building for 10, 20, 50,000 units a year, not necessarily 500,000.
So most of your production suppliers are relationships that you got through CPC. So they're most likely European suppliers.
I would say most of the mechanical components have been European. So the body structure, the frame, the chassis, those things have come from Europe. The glass, is a Spanish company from Spain.
I'll stop here for a bit. I'm letting them go a long time because there's really nothing being said like normal. But anyway, I'm making the point now that if you were to go back, say, to April, May of 2021, and you will see when they had nothing to do with CPC, that they were going to production build in volume by the end of 2021. Now, if this is the case, then they must have had all the part suppliers lined up without any help from CPC. Now they're going, CPC are the ones that are giving them all the leads to all the suppliers. It just doesn't make sense. They were promising, without CPC, to build on the production line in numbers by the end of 2021. And it was May when they were saying they'd be able to do this. And now they're going, we're relying on CPC to give us the leads for suppliers, and these things take a long time. It's always a case when people are not upfront, when they've got something to hide, you can usually tell over time because they can't have consistency in their stories. And there's too much inconsistency in Chris Anthony's stories. Way too much inconsistency. Look back into 2021, look at his promises, and now look at how they're changed. And it's not just because they've changed the body shell, it's all the little things around it that are just going flaky.
The interior company is in Italy there. So, but the electronics and battery stuff, that's not something that CPC really had relationships for. So we found that on our own.
Right. So in the update, it looked like you guys had like a local partner that was doing the tab welding on the battery packs that you're testing now.
Yeah, it's the supplier that sells us the robots to do it ourselves. So we have California Energy Commission grant, and we're testing out the robots, and then they'll end up on the floor here to make the battery packs here, along with the automation equipment that CT&S is building for us. So we're responsible for the design and validation of that design for the battery modules and the battery pack and the power distribution and, the busing and all that stuff, contactors, DC, FC, fast charge, that sort of stuff. But CTNS, they do the automation to actually build it at scale and really churn through the volume on that stuff. So
I've got to jump in wherever I can. Another thing from memory, and I have to go from memory because it's very hard to go searching back a couple of years and finding these things, but I think you'll find them in SEC filings, where statements they made about how they operate were saying that they had a simple manufacturing process that required way fewer robots. And now he's talking about robots. I believe that's a change too. Robots just to make batteries. But in the initial stage, they were saying this is a pretty simple, small item. It's not a big car. It's a small item, very simple, way less parts, and they used to say in the hundreds of parts less. And so there'll be fewer robots, yet it appears as though they have some very complicated robots turning up. And that's for the batteries. They always had to have the batteries. It's always been an electric EV.
Okay, so they're not going to be the ones. CTNS is not building the packs for the PI vehicles.
they are building the factory in Korea that will build those packs. And then they're going to transport that factory here and build those packs for us here.
Okay, but that's
They're
for the
responsible for the factory part of it.
right. They're
Really the design logic or any of the validation or anything.
okay, yeah. So they're building the machine to build the machine. But the these test production intent vehicles, not the production vehicles, the production intent vehicles, CTNS is not building those packs. You guys are building those packs kind of one by one.
Yeah, they're doing manufacturing trials. So they're actually building battery modules now too.
Okay.
That would validate how they're going to build them in volume production.
Okay.
We'll be making, like, if we learn anything from our validation durability testing, like this week, one of our battery modules is off at a shaker jig and it'll shake it, up to what is 150,000 miles of durability. And we'll see if, any of the hold down brackets break or if any of the ends of the power busing, shake too much and break one of the welds or something. I mean, it should just test the durability of the thing. But if we learn anything, then we would make those changes and CTNS would build that module per our changes. So we're responsible for design, release, and validation. They're responsible for how does the robot pick up the cell, put it in the module? How does the robot put the current collector plate on it and then send it over to the robot that welded all? Then sends it over to the foam machine that pots it. And then you got this, stack of battery modules. How does the robot pick up that stack of battery modules and put it into a 6-module pack, load up the power distribution, close up the pack, seal the pack, and have it ready for, installation into an Aptera vehicle. So they'll perfect that manufacturing of the pack in Korea and probably build the first couple hundred packs there.
I see.
And then they'll ship those packs to us for the first couple hundred vehicles. And then we'll take a pause while they ship all the manufacturing equipment, that whole assembly line here.
Oh, okay.
In California and in Carlsbad, then we'll be producing those modules and packs here.
Okay, so the plan is not to have 2 concurrent battery lines. You're going to move the whole battery line from Korea to there.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I kind of thought that like they were going to build it and then you were going to build a second one here and then like build them together or something.
If we had infinite capital,
you would do that. Because I'm guessing that the equipment must be very expensive then, so it must be worth the shipping cost of shipping it over.
Yeah, the most expensive part is the armed robots that move stuff around and have to be really accurate. Laser welding robots that weld the current collector onto the battery modules. They're just they're expensive pieces of tech.
Yeah,
they're not terribly huge or difficult to ship. So, we have to decide: are we going to put those things on a plane, or are we going to ship them by sea? I imagine we're probably going to put them on a plane and ship them over here.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, we're going to divvy up this into 3 parts, mainly because I am out of town for this week.
All right. I didn't have too many comments there, but I'd just like to say that the cretin's still guessing, but when the snake oil salesman gets through his drivel, the cretin is always appeased. He goes, oh yeah, that's good. Well, that'll do for now. As always, that's all from me. Bye for now. Stay safe.